It's that time of year again. Everyone knows that the holidays can become overwhelming quickly, so the sooner that you get things done, the better. For both shoppers and businesses, the best time to score great deals during the holidays is Black Friday and Cyber Monday weekend. And that's why you need Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., from household names like Allbirds and Cowboy e-bikes to entrepreneurs who will be participating in their very first Black Friday or Cyber Monday this year. Shopify has everything you need to succeed from start to finish. First, Shopify's marketing tools help push your brand to the forefront of the chaos, no matter what platform your customers are on. Then, Shopify helps draw customers in with the ease of a convenient checkout with Shop Pay, Shopify's expedited checkout that saves customers information and reduces hassle. The best part? Shop Pay has been proven to boost conversions, meaning you see less abandoned carts and more profits. You can also stress less knowing that Shopify's award-winning customer support team is on standby 24/7 to help with any issues that arise, allowing you to get back to business as fast as possible. This Black Friday, join thousands of new entrepreneurs hearing for the first time with Shopify. Sign up for your free trial today at shopify.com/income. That's shopify.com/income. Go to shopify.com/income and make this Black Friday one to remember.
The Presidencies of the United States is a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Hello and welcome to the Presidencies of the United States. I'm your host, Jerry Landry. And as this is an episode of our Vice Presidency Special Series, I am joined by my esteemed co-host, Alex. Alex, welcome.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks for having me. And thank you for this very interesting episode that we're about to embark on.
Absolutely. We wanted to take some time to finish up this episode on a fascinating figure, Daniel D. Tompkins. As we've seen, he's risen up from rural beginnings to end up as governor of New York. So we're going to go from there and see what happens because we've got to get him to the vice presidency, which is why we're talking about it.
That's right.
So after resigning as governor, Tompkins proceeded on to Washington, D.C. in order to be present at the inauguration ceremony on March 4th, 1817. So we remember from Elbridge Gerry's episode, he hadn't even shown up for the inauguration, but Tompkins is like, it's important to be there.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, as his wife Hannah had fallen ill the year before, she did not accompany Daniel to the nation's capital for the inauguration events. But he was at least there, and Monroe and Tompkins rode by horseback, accompanied by well-wishers to the Capitol for the inauguration ceremony. Now, as the Capitol building had been burned in the British invasion of Washington in 1814, the inauguration ceremonies this year took place at the old brick Capitol, which was a temporary structure being used to house Congress until the U.S. Capitol could be reconstructed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as was tradition, Tompkins was inaugurated first in the Senate chamber and delivered what the National Intelligencer dubbed to be a quote-unquote pertinent address, where he acknowledged his, quote, inexperience in the forms of deliberative assemblies, while promising, as president of the Senate, to operate with, quote, upright intentions, zealous industry, and rigid impartiality.
Mm-hmm.
After his speech, Tompkins joined the other attendees on the portico set up for Monroe's inauguration. That evening, Tompkins attended the inaugural ball at the Davis Hotel. So, while the special session of the 15th U.S. Congress only lasted a couple of days to confirm Monroe's nominees, there wasn't really much for Tompkins to do except to consider what his lodging situation would look like in Washington when he returned later in the year for the full session. So, though Tompkins had expressed his interest in the vice presidency to be, in part, a money-saving feature by not having to secure a full second household in the district, Tompkins in April 1817 did for a time negotiate with a Treasury official about the possibility of either buying or renting his house. soon enough, Tompkins was dissuaded from this idea and ultimately would not buy any property in Washington. It just didn't make sense, especially if you're having money issues already.
Right.
Indeed, his wife Hannah would never join him in the nation's capital during his tenure as vice president.
Really? Never?
Never.
Wow.
So without her there, without any of the family there, there wasn't really a need to do anything more than take up rooms for himself as his predecessors had done. But ultimately, trying to figure all this out, having kind of a game plan going, Tompkins returned home to New York and settled into a slower paced life. So this was the first time for years that he wasn't trying to think about the defense of New York and trying to figure out the state finances.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually able to just go home.
Wow. Who would imagine VP role would be a little more calm than governor of New York?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I don't blame him. Don't blame him one bit.
So while Tompkins waited for a full session of Congress to begin in order for him to take up his official duties, now that he had some more free time, he turned to a personal project that he had been working on for years, the development of Staten Island. So for those who are unfamiliar with the geography of New York City, Staten Island is, in the present day, the smallest populated borough situated in the southwest corner of the city, close to New Jersey.
It's the most remote borough as well. I mean,
it
it's
is
far removed from the other 4 boroughs.
Exactly. But at this point in history, Staten Island was nearly a century away from becoming a part of New York City. So it wasn't even a part of the city at that point, and you think of it as remote now, even more so then.
It must have been the frontier at that point.
The population at this point was less than 6,000 on a land area of nearly 60 square miles.
Mm-hmm.
So while working on the defenses of New York while serving as governor, Tompkins had had reason to visit it multiple times. And he saw potential for development. Thus, he made his initial land investment there in June 1814, and by 1815, he had founded the village of Tompkinsville, naming the streets of the town after his family members. Now, he knew that the island would be slow to develop without better transportation between it and New York City, what we think of as Manhattan. And at this point, New York City was really the lower tip of Manhattan Island.
Right.
So thus, in early 1816, he had begun work on getting a steamboat ferry service set up between Staten and Manhattan Islands.
The precursor to the Staten Island Ferry.
Yes.
That's awesome. Wow.
So he also worked to get the New York State Legislature in March 1816 to incorporate the Richmond Turnpike Company, which would link Tompkinsville with the Blazing Star Ferry on the other side of the island.
Mm-hmm.
So once the ferry service to Manhattan was inaugurated in late November 1817, there would now be a shorter route between Philadelphia and New York City through Staten Island. Now, at the end of his term as governor and before proceeding to Washington, Tompkins had secured a conditional charter for a college on Staten Island to be named Washington College. However, the end goal of all this was to secure a merger between the, as of yet, ephemeral Washington College and the much too real Columbia College, and secure Columbia's move from Manhattan to Staten Island.
Oh, wow. Well, we know how that turned out.
Yes, it didn't. It would prove to be a step too far for Columbia's Board of Regents, and they shelved the proposal.
Yeah, I don't blame them. Why would they want to move to this remote backwater island?
I mean, you've got Tompkinsville. What more do you need?
Tompkinsville College. And he was an alumnus of
Columbia.
Right.
Yes.
Wow. Very interesting.
So still, despite the setback, Tompkins would continue his efforts to promote the development of Staten Island, and he hoped that he would be aided in this by a visit by a prominent visitor. As we'll talk more about in his presidency series, Monroe decided to take a page from George Washington's playbook and set out shortly after taking office on the first leg of a national tour. As this trip would take him to New York City, Monroe decided to spend some time at the home of the vice president on Staten Island. He arrived there on the evening of June 9th and received a warm reception. As noted by historian Noble Cunningham, Monroe would lodge with the Tompkins family on Staten Island for a few days, quote, while visiting the military installations in the vicinity. Now, Tompkins would have the honor, as head of the Society for Encouragement of American Manufacturers, to induct Monroe into the society on June 13th. As Monroe proceeded on his tour to New England, Tompkins remained on Staten Island, where he would spend the summer and fall. Unfortunately, Tompkins fell into ill health at one point, and his eldest son, Griffin, is noted as being, quote unquote, incapacitated during this time, which was recounted in Niles' Weekly Register as being a, quote, remittent and typhus fever.
Ooh, not good.
Now, for his own injury, as he recounted to New York Supreme Court Chief Justice Smith Thompson in early September, Tompkins felt that it related to his fall from the horse in late 1814 when he took command of the 3rd Military District. So that tumble he took, he felt that this was the reason he was having ill health. As he told Thompson, quote,
"The injuries I received by the fall from my horse have increased upon me for several years, till finally, for the last 6 weeks, they have confined me to my house and a few rods around it, and sometimes to my bed. I am thereby deprived of the power of visiting the city, or riding or walking abroad, or of attending to my extensive outdoor concerns. My present prospect is that kind of affliction and confinement for the residue of my life. I shall probably resign the office of Vice President at the next session, if not sooner, as there is very little hope of my ever being able to perform its duties hereafter." Ooh, man.
Yeah.
Pretty pessimistic there.
And remember, this is still very early on in his vice presidency. He just became vice president.
Dang. Yeah. Well, that's a pretty rough go, having a fall and not being able to get around. I don't know. I probably wouldn't put it out there that soon, but anyway,
Yeah.
He's had a lot on him.
He's had a lot on him.
Mm-hmm. Trying to move Columbia to frickin' Staten Island.
Good luck with that one. But Tompkins was also in a bad place financially. The financial obligations he had undertaken for the public good, as well as in the development of Staten Island, were coming to be too much. And in June, he requested a loan of $105,000 from the Manhattan Company.
Goodness gosh. What would that be equal to in modern dollars? Probably
a lot.
$1 million?
Probably.
At least.
Yeah.
Okay. At least.
I don't know for certain, but definitely a lot.
That's a lot.
Quick editor's note here. I actually looked this up after our recording. $105,000 in 1817 is equal to over $3.2 million in 2015 dollars, according to our friends at the Historical Currency Converter. Yes, that is a lot. This request was refused, despite his offer to hold as collateral security $125,000 of stock and property for the Richmond Turnpike Company, as well as the mortgage for properties in New York City and Staten Island. So he did at least obtain a $25,000 loan from a friend in Philadelphia and $40,000 from the Bank of the United States. And Peter J. Monroe, in whose law office he had worked during his college days, readily offered his financial support without Tompkins having to ask. However, there was still much more finagling to be done to make ends meet. Tompkins, at this point, could not even afford to pay artist Thomas Sully the remaining $200 due for a portrait that he had been commissioned to do of the vice president.
Wow.
This did not stop Tompkins from providing $500 as well as a lot of land on Staten Island to establish the Tompkinsville Reformed Protestant Church. So he's kind of playing loose with his money.
I was going to say, making it rain up there in Staten Island.
I mean, it's good to support your church when you can, but
when you can't pay your bills, you need to kind of prioritize things.
Yeah. In October 1817, Tompkins signed an agreement in which he relinquished the exclusive right to operate steamboats from New York to Staten Island to a man named Thomas Gibbons. Gibbons would end up in a legal dispute about this with a business rival, Aaron Ogden, in a case that would ultimately make it to the Supreme Court in 1824. Gibbons v. Ogden was a landmark case that ended up breaking up a long-standing steamboat monopoly and confirming the federal government's authority to regulate interstate commerce. So, things are not going great.
No.
But he's still vice president. And so in the latter part of the year, Tompkins began the journey back to Washington, D.C. He wrote to Hannah from Philadelphia on December 19th, while en route, that, quote, "I do not expect to remain long in Washington, not longer than the third day in January at the farthest, and perhaps not so long. This, however, would prove to be an underestimation of the time required for him in the nation's capital. And his letter to Hannah on February 24th, 1818, provides us with a glimpse of the social obligations which filled his time, in addition to his duties presiding over debates and votes in the Senate. Quote, I dined on Saturday with Mr. Crawford, Secretary of State, actually Secretary of the Treasury, but I digress. Not sure why he wrote Secretary of State.
Okay.
In company
Wonder
with...
if he was doing double duty.
No, he actually wasn't. I will say, and folks can listen to the Crawford episode as well as John Quincy Adams' episode. They were definitely distinct offices.
Okay. Maybe he was so disheveled that he mistakenly referred to it in the wrong outfit.
That's probably more the case.
That's probably it. Okay, there you go. Yet another glimpse into the
He's all mixed up.
situation. Yeah.
DDT is all
DDT
mixed up.
is just foobar. Sorry.
Here we go.
Count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS and Paramount Plus.
This is incredible.
Watch your local NFL game live all season long.
And he's in for a touchdown.
Visit ParamountPlus.com/NFL to get started today.
So in company with the judges of the Supreme Court. So that's his dining on Saturday. On Sunday, I dined at the president's. On Monday evening, attended the birthnight ball at Georgetown a short time, but did not stay to supper. And today, Tuesday, dined with Commodore Decatur. Tomorrow night is the drawing room night at the president's. So he's keeping busy.
Yeah.
In terms of his official duties in the Senate, his biographer Irwin wrote that, quote, his fairly light duties as presiding officer of the Senate, he seems to have performed in a conscientious, efficient, and generally satisfactory manner. Even one of the key duties of the vice president, that of breaking a tie-breaking vote in the Senate, Tompkins was only rarely called to do, ultimately casting only 4 tie-breaking votes in his entire vice presidency.
Wow. That's not many.
Not many. It also reflects, that this was a one-party time for the most part. There were still some Federalists lingering, but mostly it was the Democratic-Republicans in
So
charge.
we had a pretty easy ride, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
That's good, considering all the other things going on.
Yeah. Meanwhile, back in Staten Island, Hannah was dealing with the illness of their daughter, Arietta, who, quote, has another turn of pain in the breast, attended with a bad cough.
Oh, no.
She took cold last Saturday week and has not been well since, while their son, Ray, quote, has had his arms and hands sadly burned by falling over the fender. For 4 weeks, they were very sore, now are nearly well. 2 fingers, I believe, will be a little stiff. So the family's not doing well back on the island.
Kinds of calamities and stuff. Yikes.
Now, ultimately, at the end of March, Tompkins decided he could tarry in Washington no longer and informed the Senate that he had private matters to attend to in New York. Thus, John Galliard, who we talked about in the last President Pro Tem episode, was chosen to take up that post again so that Tompkins could make his way back home.
Good Galliard.
Galliard is good. So as noted by Irwin, quote, Tompkins' finances at this time were in a state of appalling confusion. The vice president himself was in part, but only in part, to blame for the situation. Now, as described by a contemporary, Jabez Hammond, quote, he, Tompkins, was irregular and unmethodical in business, not systematical in keeping his accounts, employed too many agents, mingled his own private funds with those of the public, was naturally careless about money, and sometimes profuse in his expenses. The novelty of a state of war and the hurry and bustle incident to that state increased the confusion in which his accounts were involved. No candid man charged him with intentional dishonesty in his pecuniary transactions. So he's saying, he's a good guy. He did what he thought was right.
Just needs to get it together.
He needs to get it together.
Right.
Indeed, 1818 saw the New York State Legislature appoint a 3-man commission to investigate the unsettled accounts of Tompkins with his handling of funds as governor during the war.
Ooh, okay.
The state comptroller's accounts noted that there were still $120,000 in public funds that were still not legally accounted for by Tompkins.
Oh, gosh.
That's not good.
That's not good at all.
Now, one of the commissioners dropped out of the process, but the other two in 1819 submitted a report, quote, in which they recommended that he, Tompkins, be generously dealt with in the settlement of his accounts. They recommended allowing him a premium on the $1 million that he had raised, quote, in part or totally on his own responsibility, which would offset the balance of $120,000. The legislature agreed to this plan. There is still one other person who needed to be sold on the idea, Tompkins. Rather than the 12% that the commission had proposed, and that was equal to the amount that the U.S. government had paid its own agents, Tompkins put forward, quote, a claim for a 25% premium that he supported with statements from various stock dealers who certified that there had existed this percentage of difference between Treasury notes and current money in 1814.
Oh, man. So you're trying to say it used to be this way, and because of that, you should give me more. Yeah. Dude. Okay. DDT, you messing up.
He's messing up. The state comptroller was appalled by this. And rather than the loose interpretation that was originally planned by the legislature, the comptroller stuck to the letter of the law passed to put the plan into motion and would only count the premium as applying, quote, to the funds raised by Tompkins on the latter's sole responsibility, not to those raised on the joint responsibility of the governor and any other agency. So he was like, hey, you want to play ball? Let's play.
Yeah. Wow.
By the summer of 1819, this had turned into a public battle, with the comptroller issuing an open letter in the newspapers attacking Tompkins. The vice president, in turn, issued his own letter in which he delivered an impassioned plea, asserting that, quote,
of thanks, sir, I've had enough of the confidence, affection, and support of the people, the army, the navy, and militia, more than I merited, of factions, opposition, calumny, detraction, and abuse, an unexampled portion, but of remuneration, indemnity, equity, or justice, nothing to me, for the toilsome days, sleepless nights, anxious cares, domestic bereavements, impaired constitution, debilitated body, unjust abuse and censure, and accumulated pecuniary embarrassments. Nothing is yielded, for which treatment, permit me to say, sir, the whole treasury of the country can never atone.
So he's like, I've been through the ringer and you're not going to support me?
Yeah.
So.
And he has, but dude, you didn't do yourself any favors either. So yeah, not a good situation.
So, as noted by Irwin, most of Tompkins's correspondence, both with President Monroe and other prominent government leaders in Washington from 1817 to 1820, dealt with federal appointments. On July 14, 1817, which was after Monroe's visit to his home on Staten Island, Tompkins wrote to the president advocating for the appointment of his friend and legal mentor, Peter J. Monroe, for an appointment to the federal judiciary. Monroe would ultimately not get an appointment. In June 1820, Tompkins tried his hand at swaying President Monroe once more, but this time for the removal of an official. David Gelston was the incumbent collector of the Port of New York, but the VP wrote to Monroe that, quote,
it is my decided opinion that you cannot reappoint Mr. Gelston to the office of collector without prejudice to your administration and the great and universal dissatisfaction of your real political and personal friends in this city and in the state generally. Mr. Gelston is so far advanced in life as to render it prudent for him to retire. Besides which, he had held the office 20 years, is wealthy and comfortable, and has but 2 children, both of whom are well provided for. Independent of the estate, he will leave them. Bitter party of one?
Yeah. He's like, why is this guy getting all the breaks?
Just a little bit.
It's like, have you seen my finances?
Yeah, I got more kids. My pocketbook is messed up, and you're going to give this old codger a chance that you're not giving me. Okay, whatever. Whatevs.
Now, in this instance, Monroe would take the advice of Tompkins and others and appointed Jonathan Thompson to the post. Meanwhile, as 1820 came around, folks in New York started to think about returning Tompkins to an office he had held previously.
Mm-hmm.
So by this point, he had been succeeded as governor by his one-time friend and now rival, DeWitt Clinton. Anti-Clintonians saw Tompkins as their best chance at ousting the incumbent governor, and on January 16, 1820, this group, led in part by Martin Van Buren, nominated him for the governorship. This did not mean, however, that there weren't concerns. At this point, they knew about his health issues, and the still unresolved accounts issue lingered as a cloud over Tompkins. Thus, Van Buren wrote to Tompkins' friend, by this point Secretary of the Navy Smith Thompson, informing him that, though Tompkins had received the nomination, many, quote, desired that you should be the candidate. So talking about Smith Thompson. You will have no trouble or expense and need have no anxiety, for no one disputes but that your nomination alone will settle the prospects of Mr. Clinton. Now, Van Buren also wrote to Senator Rufus King, Federalist from New York, urging him to approach both Thompson and Tompkins about the idea of the secretary running in place of the vice president. King did indeed speak to both men, but found both reluctant to make a commitment. Tompkins was preparing to travel to Albany at the end of January and said that he would wait until he arrived to scope out the situation on the ground before making a final decision about accepting or declining the nomination. King did warn him that he felt it likely that many Federalists would support Clinton if Tompkins was the nominee, while he thought they could get behind Thompson if he ran instead. Meanwhile, on January 28th, Thompson wrote to Van Buren that he felt Tompkins should be the nominee as he was concerned about how the public would view replacing Tompkins on the ticket after the fact, and that he felt whoever ran in the vice president's place would also be burdened with the controversy of the settling of Tompkins's accounts.
Okay.
So he's basically saying, we've got this problem here. Y'all went ahead and nominated him.
What were you thinking?
What were you thinking?
Right.
Tompkins, however, was delayed in setting off to New York by a major debate occurring in the Senate over the admission of Missouri as a state, or, more accurately, the proposal to restrict slavery in Missouri. Now, during this debate, Tompkins at one point initiated a disruptive incident. As president of the Senate, he had the authority to invite folks to take seats on the floor of the Senate. Apparently, at some point recently, he had been talking with a group of ladies at a senator's home, and Tompkins invited them to take seats on the Senate floor, which they did so that day. However, when other women in the galleries saw these ladies taking seats on the floor, they abandoned their seats and went down to the floor to take seats of their own. They're like, why are those women down there? Hey, let's go. It's a better seat.
Yeah.
As described by one of the ladies, quote, "'Twas then that our vice president began to look alarmed and did not attend strictly to the member addressing the chair. The senators, some of them, frowned indignantly and were heard to mutter audibly, 'Too many women here for business to be transacted properly.'"
Oh, my goodness.
The next day, Tompkins had a note posted on the door leading to the Senate floor that, quote, "Ladies not introduced by one of the senators were not allowed on the floor."
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah. A harsher criticism came from Senator King, who accused Tompkins of not using his position to do more for the fight against slavery in Missouri. Quote, "Tompkins and Case fled the field on the day of battle. This is entre nous. I'm sorry that Tompkins flinched, as it will be construed to mean what I hope it does not indicate." So basically, he was saying you had a chance to do something here, and you didn't. To King's point, Tompkins at this point did seem too distracted by the accounts issue, as well as the question of his gubernatorial nomination, to give too much energy to the Missouri debate. And on January 25th, he took his leave of the Senate to return to New York. So this is one of the major debates of the time, and Tompkins leaves, and especially on an issue that he had previously expressed strong opinions about, slavery.
Yeah. None of this is boding well, DDT.
No, it's not. So soon after his arrival at his home on Staten Island, Tompkins was visited by Van Buren, who wanted to not only settle the matter of the gubernatorial nomination, but also offered to look over Tompkins's papers related to the disputed accounts. As Van Buren wrote of the vice president at the time, quote, "I found him, in comparison with what he had been, exceedingly helpless. Conscious of his integrity in all things, sensible of the great services he had rendered to the country at periods of its utmost need, and of the disinterestedness of his motives, his feelings had not been callous or his resolution strong enough to enable him to bear up against the injustice and the calumny of which he was now made the victim. As Van Buren began looking through the papers, he soon found, quote, not only satisfactory, but highly credible explanations that featured largely in the comptroller's letter, in the federal press, and in the pamphlets which the enemies of the vice president had written on the subject of his accounts. So though Tompkins was buoyed by this reassurance and agreed to stand for election, Van Buren still had concerns about the vice president's gubernatorial run and talked with Tompkins' son-in-law and the son of the Navy Secretary, Gilbert L. Thompson. Van Buren questioned him about Tompkins' drinking, and Thompson admitted, quote, that Tompkins' heavy drinking was the result of his recent trouble and worry, and that it was a purely temporary condition. So, again, not looking good.
No.
And he just seems to be on this
Downward spiral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next step was that Van Buren worked with Tompkins on a response to the New York State Comptroller's latest pamphlet attacking him on the matter of the accounts, while Van Buren returned to Albany and put forward a resolution in the state Senate, quote, requiring the Comptroller to submit a report to that body regarding the status of Tompkins' accounts insofar as they involve the state. When the report came, Van Buren made sure that he was named chairman of the select committee charged with reviewing the report, and on March 9th, they issued their findings that the comptroller should have allowed Tompkins a 12.5% premium, which, when applied, meant that Tompkins was owed $11,870.50.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Van Buren could only control matters in the Senate. When the state assembly had their go, they backed the comptroller and amended the bill to state that if Tompkins did not pay the amount that the comptroller said the state was owed by August 1st, they would file a lawsuit against him.
Ooh, man. Scandal.
Yeah.
R. Kelly level of scandal.
I don't think we're at that level yet.
But it's not looking good.
It's not good.
You messing up, man.
The comptroller's after you. Meanwhile, Tompkins delayed his journey to Albany for a bit, arriving on Washington's birthday, February 22nd, to a hearty welcome from the citizens of the city, as well as a military escort from the ferry to his lodgings. That afternoon, a mass meeting of around 800 to 1,000 people gathered at the state capitol to confirm Tompkins' nomination for governor. With Tompkins and Clinton splitting the Democratic-Republicans in New York, many felt that Federalist support could sway the election one way or another. Thus, the Tompkins faction reached out to Senator Rufus King, attempting to get his endorsement of the vice president, but King remained undecided. Tompkins even attempted to explain his position on the Missouri issue to King's son, John A. King, in a letter in late March, asserting that, quote,
my opinion is that by the Constitution, Congress have the discretion of requiring as a preliminary condition of the admission of a state, composed of territory not originally in the U.S., that slavery be prohibited in such new state, and that it is expedient and just to require that condition to be performed in relation to Missouri and all other territory acquired therewith.
Though some Federalists came out in support of Tompkins, King remained on the sidelines. While Governor Clinton largely used the power of his pen to push his campaign, Tompkins traveled around the state to, quote, make personal appearances before a considerable number of groups in what his managers considered to be politically doubtful portions of the state. So this was that glad handing. This was his actual getting out and campaigning, being able to reach out to the people that had worked before.
Mm-hmm.
It would not work this time, however. In early May, Clinton won re-election with 47,447 votes to Tompkins' 45,990. Now, while we can't rule out that Tompkins' account issue may have played a role in the election, it should also be taken into consideration that Clinton had already pushed forward his plan for the Erie Canal, which was highly popular in the western portion of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Though Clinton won another term as governor, as his opponents won control of the state assembly, the matter of Tompkins's accounts was soon resolved favorably to him as soon as the new legislature assembled.
Well, that's good.
So at least that's out of the way. Also, though he had lost Clinton at the ballot box, Tompkins, who had been a Mason since 1800, was elected in early June 1820 to replace Clinton as the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the state of New York. So he at least replaced him in one place.
Yeah.
The gubernatorial defeat did not mean Tompkins's political retirement, however, as there was a presidential election in 1820 that he would nominally play a role in, though calling what happened in 1820 an election seems rather of an overstatement.
Ooh.
Now, simply put, there was no opposition to another term for Monroe and Tompkins as president and vice president, respectively.
Right.
Even the congressional caucus, which, for the past few election cycles, had gathered to nominate candidates, attracted less than 50 members of Congress, and they decided that they wouldn't put forward a nomination. They didn't even care to make a nomination.
Oh, my goodness.
Nobody cared. Everybody was just resigned. Yeah, Monroe and Tompkins, they're the ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And when the electors cast their votes, they won handedly, although one person cast a vote for John Quincy Adams rather than Monroe for president, and a scattering of votes went to other candidates other than Tompkins for vice president. But it was no contest.
Mm-hmm.
As noted by historian Noble E. Cunningham, quote, although Tompkins was reelected in 1820, he was little respected in Washington. He never presided with any regularity over the Senate, and his absence was a relief to many senators.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. Indeed, as former Senator William Plumer of New Hampshire, the one elector who voted against Monroe in 1820, said of Tompkins in a speech around the time attacking the administration, quote, his duty consists in presiding over the Senate, for which he receives annually a salary of $5,000. During the last 3 years, he was absent from the Senate during their session nearly 3/4 of the time, and thereby occasioned an extra expense to the nation of nearly $2,500 because they had to pay the president pro tem.
Yeah, right.
He has not that weight of character which his office requires. The fact is, he is grossly intemperate. I cannot vote for him to be again vice president.
Ooh.
Now, whether a reflection of his disinterest in the office or attempting to follow a precedent set by Elbridge Gerry, Tompkins was inaugurated for the second time in New York rather than traveling to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration and to preside over the short session of Congress.
Wow.
Yeah. He couldn't even bother to show up for his inauguration the second time.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
As March 4th fell on a Sunday, Tompkins followed Monroe's cue and received the oath of office both on the 3rd and the 5th. For Monroe, the former was in private, while the latter was in a public ceremony. But it seems that for Tompkins, both were private. His health and his continued financial issues were both cited as excuses for Tompkins's more prolonged absences in the second term, and it seems that it did little to help his reputation among Washington politicos.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Lewis McLean, Federalist from Delaware, wrote about how Tompkins had tried to join his mess at Struthers Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, but how everyone in the house had tried to find a reason to say no to him. On Tompkins, quote, he bears the most evident and conclusive marks of a sot.
Oh!
And the apprehension is that his habits may interfere with our pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, not good. Not good, not good.
Yeah.
DDT. R.I.P.
Yeah. Now, while he was at times inattentive to his duties as vice president, Tompkins did get heavily involved in the New York State Constitutional Convention in 1821. This was the third constitutional convention that the state had held since its inception. One of the main drivers for the convention was to expand the voting franchise, as though the adult male population had grown considerably in the northwest and central portions of the state, as most of those folks did not own property, or if they did not own enough to be eligible to vote. So this was what Tompkins had experienced when he was younger.
Yeah.
They also wanted to revise or abolish certain portions of the state governmental apparatus, like the Council of Appointment and Council of Revision, that were highly unpopular. Delegates to the convention were chosen in June 1821, and the Tompkins-Van Buren faction of the Democratic-Republican Party won the vast majority of delegates, 110 to 13 Federalists and 3 Clintonians. Naturally, both Tompkins and Van Buren won election to direct matters in the chamber. The convention began on August 28th, and Tompkins was chosen as the president of the convention by an overwhelming majority of the vote. As president, he had the, quote, authority to nominate all committees, to preserve order and decorum, to decide questions of procedure subject to appeal to the convention, to recognize speakers, and to appoint committee chairmen. Now, Tompkins achieved an early victory when a committee recommendation to abolish the Council of Revision was approved, but the replacement of a governor veto, which could be overridden by a two-thirds majority of the legislature, was not what Tompkins had proposed. He had called for the governor, attorney general, and other quote-unquote able counselors to have a veto. Tompkins was also actively engaged in the debate on reform of the state judicial system, as well as a replacement plan for the Council of Appointment. Now, when it came to discussing the extension of the voting franchise, Tompkins favored a proposal from Peter A. Jay that language allowing for quote-unquote male white citizens to be eligible to vote be altered to remove the word white. The convention would find another way to make voting more difficult for people of color in the state, but they weren't completely forbidden from voting thanks to this change of language. Tompkins would deliver remarks to the convention in favor of universal male suffrage, arguing that, quote,
property, sir, when compared with other essential rights, is insignificant and trifling. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not of property, are set forth in the Declaration of Independence as cardinal objects. Property is not even named.
He also cited the injustice of the fact that many folks who fought bravely for the state during the War of 1812 were ineligible to vote. Tompkins also joined Senator Rufus King in actively supporting retaining existing state law, quote, providing for emancipation of all slaves in New York State after July 4th, 1827. Finally, on November 10th, the convention adopted the proposed state constitution by a vote of 98 to 8. Tompkins delivered a brief address, which we'll quote in part here, since it doesn't seem that he delivered a farewell address to the Senate upon the end of his term. More on that in a moment. Tompkins told the convention that, quote,
it is my sincere hope that the approbation of this community may crown the result of our consultations, and that it may accomplish the momentous objects for which he have been assembled, and redound to the liberty, tranquility, and permanent welfare of our constituents, and of posterity. Whilst I tender you an affectionate adieu, indulge me, gentlemen, in a fervent expression of my acknowledgments for your uniform support and approbation, and my best wishes for your respective happiness and prosperity. He loves that word approbate, doesn't he?
He does.
Twice.
Twice.
Okay.
Hopefully not thrice.
Thrice.
So the new state constitution was approved by the voters in February 1822, and it would actually stay in place largely without amendments for the next 25 years.
Nice.
So that's definitely something to consider in terms of his impact, because he played a role in this.
At the state level, at least.
At the state level, which, again, we'll talk about.
We'll talk.
After the convention, Tompkins returned home to Staten Island, and Irwin describes him at this point as follows, quote, the vice president was now a tragic figure. Broken in finances and health, he was prematurely old. His friends could no longer deny that he was drinking to excess. Meanwhile, his political enemies and his creditors were subjecting him to savage attack. Though he would return to Washington, D.C., lawmakers in that city continued to report on Tompkins's poor state. Indeed, Senator Waller Taylor, Democratic-Republican from Indiana, wrote in a letter in mid-February 1822 that, quote, his habits became so notoriously debauched that it was matter of such gratification to the Senate to get clear of him.
Oof.
He has become a confirmed sot.
Goodness gracious.
Taylor also wrote of Tompkins presiding over the Senate while intoxicated and concluded him to be, quote, morally and politically destroyed.
Oof. All right, DDT. You messed it up now.
It's really not good. His creditors now included his father-in-law, Mangle Minthorn, who had endorsed some notes for Tompkins and was now himself in dire financial straits.
Ooh.
So he brought down his father-in-law.
Oh, my gosh.
To the point that his father-in-law had to file a suit to claim $25,000 from Tompkins.
Gosh.
By mid-January 1822, Tompkins, quote, assigned and trust all his real estate and personal property to a group of individuals for the benefit of his creditors. Yeah.
This is tragic.
This is really, really bad.
I don't think the story ends happy, does it?
We're about to find out. Tompkins's return to Washington in January 1822 meant that he was on hand to participate in a political controversy regarding the postmastership of Albany, New York. Postmaster General Return J. Meigs had removed the incumbent in that post due to, quote-unquote, financial delinquency, and a majority of the New York state delegation put forward Solomon Van Rensselaer as his replacement. As Van Rensselaer was a supporter of DeWitt Clinton, he was opposed by Tompkins, Secretary of the Navy Smith Thompson, and Senators Rufus King and Martin Van Buren. So every prominent person from New York is saying, don't do this.
Oof.
When Meigs spoke to Tompkins and Van Buren about the matter, quote, Tompkins broke out into the most violent language against the president himself.
Oh, wow.
And in the presence of a person who he must have known would report all he said to him. And indeed, word did get back to Monroe.
Oh, goodness. This is turning into a bona fide train wreck.
This is a train wreck. Choo-choo. Though Tompkins, King, and Van Buren worked to push the candidacy of John Lansing, ultimately, Monroe allowed Meigs to appoint Van Rensselaer. After this incident, Tompkins wrote to King that, quote,
my health has suffered so much on my journey and since my arrival at the seat of government that I am desirous, as soon as the weather and the state of the road will permit, to return to my family. No doubt.
And sure enough, soon he was back on the road to New York. Now, one of the primary issues remaining with Tompkins's finances were his wartime accounts with the federal government. Though the favorable state legislature had resolved his accounts with New York, he was still going back and forth with the feds, to the point that they garnered his salary as vice president in order to start paying back his debt to them.
Goodness gracious.
Now, to be fair to Tompkins, other prominent figures in the past, including John Adams and James Monroe, had struggled for decades to resolve their accounts with the federal government related to their public service. But Tompkins had nothing else to rely on and personal debts requiring his attention. So at least Adams and Monroe had had something to fall back on. He had nothing.
Overextended and just
not good. In late May 1822, Tompkins wrote to Secretary of War John C. Calhoun that he had, quote,
insisted that a suit might be instituted against me in the District Court of the U.S. for a supposed balance for which I have been reported among the defaulters.
The trial began in Manhattan on June 3rd, with Tompkins delivering an impassioned defense in which he claimed that accounting errors in the Treasury Department were responsible for the supposed balance due from him, and that, in fact, the federal government owed him money. Numerous witnesses, including Senator Rufus King, the Federalist, appeared on Tompkins's behalf, relating how Tompkins had been urged to take personal responsibility for loans necessary for the war effort when the federal government was powerless to provide funds. So he's got folks saying, this just isn't right.
Yeah.
He was doing his duty.
He did the wrong thing for the right reason.
Yeah.
And now he's getting punished.
The jury ultimately ruled for Tompkins and awarded him a sum of $136,799.97 due to him from the federal government.
Why don't they just round it up to the next dollar? I mean, it's 3 cents.
I mean, maybe he just gave them 3 cents and they rounded it up.
Wow.
Which at that point it would be $136,800. That's a nice round number. Anyway, Tompkins returned to Washington, D.C. in December 1822, both to resume his duties in the Senate, as well as to seek payment from the federal government. Hey, knock, knock, knock. Where's my money?
Goodness. Okay.
Congress would back him on this, and in February 1823, a select committee in the House that had been appointed to investigate Tompkins's claims recommended not only the repayment of the claims, but also that interest be awarded to it.
Ooh, okay. Let's go for the gusto.
So they're really like, we need to help this poor guy. So after the House passed a bill urging Tompkins's reimbursement, the bill went to the Senate, and Tompkins withdrew from presiding over the Senate as the bill was debated.
Well, that's nice of him.
He was like, it's
conflict of interest.
Probably not right for me to be here, with our old friend Senator John Galliard taking his place at the dais as President pro tem. Though this bill would pass, there was still more work needed from both the Treasury Department and Congress before Tompkins's claim could actually be settled. In the meantime, the vice president's financial state continued to worsen to the point that rumors filtered into Washington while Congress was out of session that Tompkins had been put into debtor's prison.
Oh.
Now, we should state, as Irwin did, so this was his biographer, he stated that this rumor, quote, has been neither proven nor disproven.
Goodness.
So it is a possibility that the sitting vice president was in prison.
Whew.
Yeah. And not overshooting Alexander Hamilton,
Right.
but for debts.
Which he had money coming back, but it was
still tied up, and he didn't actually have the money. Meanwhile, Monroe reported back to Congress that the Treasury Department, after evaluating their books, quote, reported a balance of $35,190 in favor of Tompkins. But the president also felt that more should be provided to him. Congress quickly pushed through a bill to provide the $35,190 to Tompkins. So, with the matter done for now, Tompkins resumed his work in the Senate towards the beginning of 1824. In late January, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams reported in his diary that he had visited with Tompkins. According to Adams, quote, he, Tompkins, told me that he had recovered his health, with the exception of sleepless nights, and that he was relieved from all his embarrassments, that he had no intention of being a candidate either for election to the presidency or for re-election as vice president. All he wanted was justice. On March 25th, that's right, your birthday, Alex.
My birthday, okay.
President Monroe took up the fight on Tompkins's behalf once more and sent a message to Congress that he felt the vice president was due a larger sum. He followed this up in April with a specific amount of $60,239.24. Congress acted swiftly, and by late May, an appropriations bill to grant this amount to Tompkins was pushed through, quote, as payment in full for the balance due him for his services, losses, and disbursements for or on account of the United States during the late war with Great Britain. As the bill came before the Senate, Tompkins again took his leave from that body, and he did not return. His last public appearance as vice president came in mid-August when General Lafayette arrived in New York on his tour of the United States. Tompkins was part of the reception committee and escorted Lafayette to stay at his home on Staten Island. Then, with very much a whisper, on March 4th, 1825, Tompkins' second term as vice president ended, and he was a private citizen once more. Tompkins was not in the nation's capital to see this transition, however. He was back home in Tompkinsville. So Irwin notes that Tompkins' health continued to decline in the winter and spring of 1825 as, quote, he drank more and more heavily, and he became morose and irritable. That spring, he ended up in a lawsuit with his son-in-law, Gilbert Thompson, over ownership of a piece of real estate on Staten Island. This case would not be resolved in time before, on June 11, 1825, Tompkins passed away at his home in Tompkinsville at the age of 50.
Good grief. Oh, man. That's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That is just, wow.
It was pretty awful. His body was taken from Staten Island aboard the ferry that he had initiated to New York City for a funeral service in St. Mark's Church before being interred there. Governor Clinton and Lieutenant Governor James Talmadge Jr. were among the New York political dignitaries present at his funeral. Hannah Tompkins survived her husband for a few more years, presumably living with her children until her death on February 18, 1829. She was interred in the Minthorne family vault at St. Mark's Church. As his estate was disputed among various claimants, his properties quickly fell into ruin, and in late October 1827, a newspaper article wrote of how Tompkins's mansion, quote, was in a shattered condition with almost every pane of glass destroyed, and with the memory of Tompkins grossly insulted in vulgar rhyme on the walls of his own edifice.
Good grief.
The legal disputes would continue, and in 1847, the federal government provided, quote, compensation to Tompkins's heirs to the amount of almost $50,000 for property losses they had sustained because of enforced sales. Even Tompkins's papers would suffer after his demise. It would only be around the end of the 19th century that they became the property of the state of New York, and though some of the papers would be published, quote, the main body of the collection remained practically untouched prior to its becoming badly damaged in the Great Albany Fire of 1911. After this disaster, the charred remnants of the collection were packed in cartons and incorrectly labeled provincial papers. No further use of them was made for many years. Yeah.
Man, you just want to talk about born under a bad sign. Cursed.
Yeah.
Cursed.
As Irwin summed it up, quote, he never reached the White House, and after his death, his countrymen gradually forgot how close he had come to it. Time dropped a veil of nescience over his image. Still, his name can be found in various parts of New York, from Tompkins Square in the East Village to Tompkins County, whose county seat is Ithaca. A bust of Tompkins is in the churchyard of St. Mark's Church, where he is buried. And that is the life and career of Daniel D. Tompkins. So, my question, rather than my usual question, I guess I should start out with, how depressed are you right now?
I feel like I've listened to, the Smiths. That's just tragic. I've said that several times before, but it is just truly tragic. He did himself no favors, though. That's the problem, and it just seems like things spiraled, and he got caught up in his own negative momentum.
Yeah.
And I feel awful for him and his family.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Well, and this really points to, and I guess let's just go ahead and get into our categories here, starting with the resume. So this round looks at the overall career and character of the vice president. We can award each 10 points maximum. So one of the things to note here, and one of the things that I think we should keep into consideration, being a public official at this point was expensive. Just in general, take everything else out of account. Tompkins had somewhat of a steady start at the beginning of his life. His family was not uber wealthy, but at least well enough. But he didn't have the advantage of wealth.
Generational wealth.
Wealth that we've seen with some of the others. And when he started to get into debt, and noting here that some of the main debt was because he was serving his state and the nation. It wasn't even that he was like Jefferson and doing massive renovations to rental properties or buying expensive books for himself or French wines.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to ensure the defense of New York.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that needs to be taken into account.
That and his desire to abolish slavery and his view on women, all of those things are admirable.
Yeah.
Warts and all, I mean, he wasn't a bad guy. He was just misguided. And again, I think he just made a string of bad decisions that he could never recover from.
Well, and to be fair, thinking about his career as a whole, the fact that he had such a rapid rise to the governorship and then because of that governorship ended up as vice president, that's something that so many others didn't do. We see figures like, George Clinton and Elbridge Gerry that it took them decades and decades and before they finally got to the vice presidency. And here he was still at a young age and becoming vice president. And to the point that when he was becoming vice president, folks were talking about him for the presidency.
He was in his 30s, I guess, when it happened?
So at that point, if he was 50 when he passed away.
He was born in 1774. He was in office, yeah.
Yeah, so he would have had to be been in his 8 years. So early 40s.
Late 30s, early 40s.
No, early 40s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was just seeing in office from 1817.
So 1817 to 1825. Like he died the same year that he left the vice presidency.
Yeah.
He actually has one of, I think the shortest post vice presidency.
Yeah.
He died, it was just, so at that point.
3 months?
3 months. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so he was in his early 40s when he assumed the vice presidency. He still potentially, had he lived and had things not gone as they had, he could have ended up as president.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
And looking at this, he died 10 days shy of his 51st birthday.
Yeah.
Goodness. Gosh, what did he do in a past life? It's just like, wow.
But he also still had this successful career, in some respects. He was able to work New York politics to the point that he was able to not just be a puppet of the Clintons. He was able to successfully secure New York at a perilous time. He was able to ensure the defense of New York. So, and he was greatly revered during those times. But in terms of points, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking middle of the road for me, 5.
Yeah.
I'm just,
And I'll admit that's probably where I'm going as well. I think that part of his career was good, and I think he could have done so much more. I mean, most of this is the defense of New York in the War of 1812 and the fact that he was actually a capable state administrator.
Yeah.
But then also to the point of, talking about his character, he did have an admirable character.
Yeah.
He was someone who had some points that he was, he supported education. He worked for the abolition of slavery in New York. So,
yeah,
I think that's where we can really take that into account.
Yeah.
But then we go to the campaign poster.
All right, let's see it.
This round examines the physical appearance of the vice president in their official portrait or photograph, and we can award up to 10 points maximum each. So, let's look at this man. So I am showing Alex this portrait of Daniel D. Tompkins, and if you can describe it to our listeners.
He doesn't look bad, but his face kind of looks sullen, and he looks a little, I don't know, introspective. Not exactly the look of confidence.
So, what are your thoughts? What points do you want to?
I've seen better. I've seen worse. I'm maybe 6.
6
points, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, poor thing, he's not the prettiest.
No, he's not. He's not.
But he doesn't look completely awful.
He doesn't. And again, not the look of confidence that you would expect in a campaign poster. So,
yeah, I may actually go a little lower. I may go with a 5.
okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to be generous because I feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, because he's not going to get much more from
He's
here.
not going to, yeah.
So right now he's at a 21.
Mm-hmm.
So next we're at friend or foe. This round evaluates whether the vice president supported the work of the administration or undercut the administration's efforts. So here we can award up to a positive 10 points or take away up to 10 points.
Okay. Ooh. I wouldn't say he was a foe.
Yeah.
But he didn't do
do the administration any favors.
So I'm going to be generous and say maybe 3.
And I'm probably going to go with a 1.
Okay. Yeah.
Positive 1, at least acknowledging he wasn't a foe. But, I mean, you have this person who 2 people described as a sot presiding over the Senate. It's not good.
No, it's definitely not good.
So then we get to the drag on the ticket.
Mm.
This round discusses any disgraceful behavior of or actions committed by the vice president, and the disgrace does not have to be during their tenure of office as vice president, though I think that's where most of our conversation is probably going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And we can detract up to 10 points maximum each.
Oof, okay.
And right now he's at a 25.
All right. DDT, I'm sorry, man, but we're going to have to go negative here. It was definitely a drag on the ticket. Would I say it was a negative 10? Maybe not, but I'm probably going to have to go with like -7, -8.
So I am going to argue in his favor.
Okay.
Here.
Convince me a little bit here.
So first of all, we do have, and I'll just go ahead and put this in perspective. We have John C. Calhoun coming up.
Yeah, that's true.
So this man who, and spoiler alerts for everybody, this man who promoted slavery as a positive good for the nation. I would say think about Tompkins in relation to that.
Okay.
Because was he an effective vice president? No, absolutely not. And it's pretty disgraceful that he was drunk and presiding over the Senate. He didn't do himself any favors there. He was in debt because, part of it was outside of his control, but also if he would have been more proactive, if he would have been a little more mindful of what was going on, if he would have tried to get ahead of this earlier, it could have been different.
Mm-hmm.
But he basically spent his entire vice presidency trying to deal with his debts to the state and federal governments.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not an absolutely awful character. He just didn't do the job well and didn't focus on the job. He was away from doing his job while still collecting the salary for a large amount of time, and that is rather scandalous.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it
so,
is.
What do you think?
Wow. I kind of feel like 0 is being generous.
I'm going to take away -2.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'm going to say because he wasn't doing his job, and especially because during the debate over Missouri, he had this chance for somebody who was so anti-slavery. He had a chance to potentially exert influence, and he didn't.
Yeah.
So that to me is scandalous. So
okay.
-2 takes away 2 points. So now he's at a 23.
Okay.
So now he's got a chance to pick up a few more points, starting with tenure of office. The entire time that this vice president served will be counted as the points for this round. Miraculously, This is the first time since we've been doing this series that we actually have somebody getting 8 points.
All right.
And I'm going to go ahead and warn you, for a long time, there's not going to be many of these.
Right. Okay. All right.
Now we get to the bonus points. A bonus point is awarded for each election that the vice president's home state went for the ticket when the VP was at the bottom of the ticket. In 2 elections, New York went both times, so he gets 2 more points there. So 10 more points. So he's at 33.
Okay.
1 bonus point if the vice president served in another lower public office, either appointed or elected after their tenure as vice president. He doesn't get that one.
Right.
1 bonus point if the vice president served out their entire term or terms as vice president.
He did.
He actually gets this point. With 8 years, he gets that point, but he does not get the bonus point for becoming president.
Okay.
He did not achieve that.
Yep.
So we end up with Daniel D. Tompkins at a total of 34 points.
All right.
And of the vice presidents that we've covered thus far, this actually puts him in 3rd place.
Wow. Surprising.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's just behind Elbridge Gerry, who's at 36. And then John Adams is still our leader with 41 points. So, Alex, with all that I've shared with you about Daniel D. Tompkins, his life and career, what we've discussed, do you think that this vice president is notable enough or impactful enough to preside from the Senate rostrum?
I hate to say it, but no.
Talk to me about that.
Again, I mean, as governor and, leading in the state of New York, yeah. But on the vice presidential stage, no. He didn't. I don't feel like he took it seriously, as serious as he could. And, there were a lot of missed opportunities. He was more preoccupied with New York than the business of the nation. So I'm going with no.
Yeah. You don't get to that point of recognition for just showing up part of the time. He's a no. So sorry, Daniel D. Tompkins. It's a no from us. We appreciate what you did for New York. I'm sure the people of New York appreciate it, even if they don't know who you are. But hopefully we have some New Yorkers listening now, and you learned about a former governor.
Look for the park in East Village or wherever it is.
There you go. People in Ithaca appreciate your county name is after him. But with that, we are wrapping up this episode. Next up is the aforementioned John C. Calhoun.
Oh, Lord.
Believe you me, we've got a ride ahead of us.
It's probably going to be a 2-parter too, huh?
I'm thinking 3.
Oh, my God.
Because this is a joint seat at the table and vice presidency's episode.
Woo!
So we are crossing our special series, which means since it's a seat at the table episode and I invite on special guests for that one, we will have somebody else joining us for the John C. Calhoun episode. For our listeners, be sure to tune in to find out who our special guest will be.
I'm excited.
So with that, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for listening to this vice president's episode, DDT. We are done. And thank you so much to our listeners. We appreciate you tuning in. If you'd like to see sources used for this episode or see past episodes of the podcast or learn more about all the American presidents, go to the website at presidenciespodcast.com. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email at presidenciespodcast@gmail.com. If you're not already, I hope you'll connect on social media. We're available on Facebook, Blue Sky, and Mastodon as Presidencies, on the formerly known as Twitter at Presidencies89, and on Instagram and Threads as Presidencies Podcast. Until next time, stay safe and healthy, be kind to one another, and take care, dear friends.
You're a guy who just wants to look nice. The kind of nice where you might get a nice compliment on the niceness of your nice new outfit. Good thing Men's Warehouse has everything from polos to jeans and, yes, suits, plus a team to help you find the perfect fit to make sure you look nice. Nice. Love the way you look. Men's Warehouse.